Today we will be learning about the area and perimeter of shapes. To begin with, let's learn about circles. There's a few things about circles we had learned previously, such as the diameter, radius, and circumference. Now we will learn a little bit more about each of those. To begin with, we said that the diameter was twice the radius. We can write this as d, or diameter, equals 2 times r, or the radius. This can also be written as the radius equals the diameter divided by 2. In addition to that, we will also need to know the value of pi. Pi is a value we use when we're dealing with circles. Pi has a value that goes on forever without any repeating digits. But for the problems we will be doing, we are going to abbreviate pi and we're going to round it off to the nearest hundredth. Therefore, we will be using 3.14 for pi in all of our examples. To find the perimeter of a circle, the perimeter is the distance around an object, such as if you were going to put a fence around an object. The length of the fence would be the perimeter. The perimeter of a circle, therefore, is also called the circumference. And the circumference is equal to 2 pi r, or 2 times pi times the radius. You can also rearrange this in any order you want, seeing as all parts are multiplication. So, if you would like to multiply the 2 times the radius first, and then multiply it by pi, that is completely acceptable. The area of a circle is A, or area, equals pi r squared. This means the radius is squared and then multiplied by pi. Let's look at example 1. Example 1 asks to find the circumference in meters, and it gives the diameter of our circle. The diameter of our circle would mean the distance all the way across going through the center point. And the diameter is 15 meters. To find the circumference, we will be using the formula C equals 2 pi r. This means we need to know the radius. Since the radius is equal to the diameter divided by 2, we could then divide 15 by 2 and find out that the radius would equal 7.5 meters, which would mean the distance of just half of the diameter, or from the center point to the edge. Now that we have the radius, we can continue finding the circumference. We will be plugging in radius for the r, meaning we will be writing 7.5 meters where r was previously located for radius. Now we will be multiplying 2 times the radius. Remember, you can do this out of order, and sometimes multiplying the two numbers before multiplying by 3.14 is much easier to do by hand. 7.5 times 2 multiplies to 15 meters. So we now have 15 pi meters. Now we will need to do 15 times 3.14. Remember, you can go off to the side and do 3.14 times 15 if you are unsure of the answer. Let's start by doing 5 times 4, which is 20, 5 times 1, which is 5, 6, 7, 5 times 3, which is 15. We then place a 0 place value and do 1 times 4 is 4, 1 times 1 is 1, and 1 times 3 is 3. Adding up the two values, we have 7 plus 4 is 11. Then we have 7 and 4. We count up how many digits we have in the decimal places and find that there's 2. So we now have an answer of 47.10 meters. This would be the circumference or the distance around that circle. Now try practice problem 1, which will be finding the area of a circle. Remember, pause the video while you work. Now we will do practice 1 together. You measure the distance from where your sprinkler is to the edge of the area it waters and find it to be 9 feet in length. You now need to determine the area in yards that your sprinkler waters so that you can determine how many more sprinklers you need to water all of your lawn at one time. Our current measurement is in feet and we need our measurement in yards. So let's start by changing our 9 feet to yards. 9 feet is representing our radius. We will not have to do anything further to use our area formula, but we will need to convert into the proper units first. If I have 9 feet, and I remember that there are 3 feet in 1 yard, I can remember that the 3 feet needs to go in the denominator so that feet reduce, and the 1 yard will go in the numerator. Now that I have 1 yard in the numerator, I would have 9 over 3 yards, which would reduce to 3 yards. Now that I know the radius in yards, I can keep going with the problem and find the area. Area is equal to pi r, or radius, squared, which means I will need to square the radius first. So let's take 3 yards and square it. When I do 3 times 3, or 3 squared, I get 9. When I do yards times yards, or yards squared, I get a yard to the second, or yard squared. There's still a pi that needs to be multiplied to this. So we would then do 3.14 times 9, and we would get a value of 13.26 yards squared. Now, let's look at some information about squares. Squares have a perimeter and area as well. To find the perimeter of a square, you still add all the sides up as if you were putting a fence all the way around the square. To write a formula for this, we typically say that the perimeter equals 4 times the s, or sides, because if I add up all 4 sides, it would be the same thing as multiplying one side 4 times. So you can write it either 4 times s, or s plus s plus s plus s. For the area of a square is one side times the other side. Since both sides are the same, you would end up with sides squared. Let's try this first problem. The length of your square is 3.5 yards. Determine the area in feet. I have the measurement in yards. I need the area in feet. So before I can even start finding the area, I should convert this unit from yards to feet. If I have 3.5 yards, I then can write down 3.5 yards, and I know that for every 1 yard, there are 3 feet. This means I should be multiplying 3.5 times 3 and getting 10.5 feet for the length of a side. Since 10.5 feet is one side, that would mean that all sides are 10.5 feet. And to find an area of a square, I should have one side squared. So that would mean that I had 10.5 feet, and I would need to square it. When I multiply 10.5 times 10.5, I get 110.25 feet squared. This would be your area in feet. Now, let's look at the practice problem. Try the practice problem on your own, remembering to pause the video. Now that you've tried the practice problem on your own, let's work through it together. You are painting a square chalkboard on the wall of your child's room. When you finish, you decide to frame it. You measure one side of the board and find it to be 1.5 meters. Determine the amount of framing, or the perimeter, you will need in centimeters. Let's start by drawing a square. Your square chalkboard is supposed to be 1.5 meters on all sides, seeing as the square has all the same side lengths. But it said to determine the amount of framing, or the perimeter, I need in centimeters. That means I need to convert my 1.5 meters to centimeters. Remembering, when converting in the metric system, we need to write down all of our prefixes. Now that we have our prefixes written down, we see where we were starting. We started at the base, or meters, and we are trying to get to centimeters, which means we should move our decimal 2 places towards the right. So if I have 1.5 and I move it 2 places to the right, this equals 150 centimeters. Since all sides are exactly the same size, then all sides should be 150 centimeters. The formula for perimeter is 4 times one side, or 4 times 150 centimeters, which would mean that I would have 4 times 150, which would be 600 centimeters. That is the perimeter of your chalkboard. Now, let's look at our next shape, which is rectangles. Remember, rectangles had 2 parallel sides opposite of each other, additional 2 parallel sides opposite of each other, and all corners were at right angles. So, the sides also had names. The name of the shorter side was the width, and the name of the longer side was the length. To determine the perimeter, we need to know these widths and lengths. So let's write down that the width is the shorter side, and the length is the longer side, because the perimeter will be equal to 2 widths plus 2 lengths. So if you times each width by 2 and then each length by 2 and add those values together, you will get the perimeter of the rectangle. Then for the area of the rectangle, you simply multiply the width times the length. Let's look at example 3. You are building a rectangular swimming pool and you want it to be as large as possible. So you measure from your patio to the fence, and it is 35 meters. Then you measure from your friend measures the distance between your neighbors' property lines, which is 3.5 hectometers. Find the area of the largest swimming pool you can build in hectometers. So, one of our values is already in hectometers. The other value will need to be converted into hectometers before beginning. Let's write down all of the prefixes. We started out at meters, and we need to go to hectometers, which means we need to move 2 places towards the left. Since we started at 35 and we moved 2 places towards the left, we should be at 0.35 hectometers. Now that we have 0.35 hectometers and 3.5 hectometers, we should be able to determine the area of the largest swimming pool. To do so, we will use the area formula. An area equals length times width, or width times length. It does not matter the order in which you write these. So that means that our area equals 3.5 hectometers times 0.35 hectometers. 3.5 times 0.35 will give us a value of 1.225 hectometers, and since hectometers times hectometers will give us hectometers squared. That means our final area will be 1.225 hectometers squared. Now try practice problem 3 on your own, remembering to push the pause button. Now that you've tried it on your own, let's do this together. It says to find the perimeter in inches. Currently, we have one side in inches and the other side in feet. Let's change the side in feet to inches. To do so, remember that to change feet into inches, we have 1 foot equals 12 inches. This would reduce the feet out, and we'd have 3.25 times 12. When we do 3.25 times 12, we get 39 inches. This would be the side that would be considered the length, and the 20 inches would be the side considered the width, seeing as the width is the shorter side. To find the perimeter, we need to do 2 times the width plus 2 times the length, which means we will need to do 2 times 20 inches, which was the width, and then we need to add that to 2 times 39 inches, which was the length. Let's start by figuring out the first value. 2 times 20 inches would be 40 inches that would be attributed to the widths. Then, if we do 2 times 39, we would have 78 inches that would be attributed to the lengths. If we add the 40 inches plus the 78 inches, we would have 118 inches total for the perimeter of our rectangle. Now, let's look at our next example. Our next example involves triangles. Remember, a triangle was 3-sided, and to find the perimeter of it is the same as finding a perimeter of any other shape. We needed to determine the distance that is around the shape. To do so, we would simply add all the sides. When you add all the sides up, you will then have the perimeter of the shape. For the area of a triangle, the area will equal 1/2 base times height, which means we would multiply the base times the height and then divide that number by 2 to give us the area of the triangle. Remember, when using triangles, you may have to determine the height on your own and the base on your own. Remember that the height must be at a right angle to the base. Example 4 asks, determine the area in millimeters of the following triangle that has a base of 10 centimeters and a height of 125 millimeters. Let's first draw a height that is at a right angle to the base, and we would label that height as being 125 millimeters. The base would then be the area that is at a right angle to the height, which would be 10 centimeters. It asks us to find the area in millimeters, which means we need to change the centimeters to millimeters. Writing out the prefix, which is K, H, D, A, B, D, C, and M, and then noting that we started at centi and we are moving to milli, we would be moving one place towards the right. When we move one place to the right, we would need to add a 0 and we'd have 100 millimeters. Now we must find the area. area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. So that means the area would be 1/2, the base being 100 millimeters and the height being 125 millimeters. We would then do 100 times 125 and we would get the value 12,500. If I have 12,500 and I had millimeters times millimeters, this would be millimeters squared. And if I now take 1/2 of this value, 1/2 of 12,500 would be 6,250 millimeters squared, which would be the area of the triangle. Now try practice problem 4 on your own, remembering to push pause while you work out the problem. Now we will work through practice problem 4 together. You are trying to hang lights on the peak of your house. You know that your house is 50 feet wide. This would be the base of the peak. And you measured your roof line to be 432 inches and 480 inches. Let's label that in a picture. But your lights are measured by the foot. How many feet of lights will you need to decorate the perimeter of the peak of your house? This means we will first need to determine the number of feet that each side of the peak is, seeing as the length that is on the house is actually 50 feet, which is already in feet. Let's start with 432 inches. Remembering that there are 12 inches in 1 foot, we can convert this. 432 over 12 feet. 432 divided by 12 will give us 36 feet. So 36 feet is equivalent to 432 inches. Next, let's convert 480 inches. And we will use the same conversion factor since we are still converting between feet and inches. 480 divided by 12 is 40 feet. Therefore, 40 feet equals 480 inches. To find the perimeter of a triangle, you simply add all sides, ensuring that all sides are the same units. That means that we will be adding 36 feet plus 40 feet plus 50 feet, which will equal 126 feet, which is the perimeter of the peak of your house, which would be the amount of lights you would need to put up. Now, let's look at trapezoids. To start out about trapezoids, the perimeter is found the same way as we found the others. You would need to find the distance around all sides. Since it does not have a simpler formula, we simply say the perimeter is you add all sides. And the area for a trapezoid equals 1/2 A plus B, remembering that A and B were symbolizing the two bases of the trapezoid. Both bases were parallel to one another. And then you do those two and multiply them by the height, which sounds similar to that of a triangle, which was 1/2 base times height. The difference being that both bases must be added together before multiplying by the height. In example 5, you are trying to buy sod for your trapezoid-shaped yard. and you know that your house is 50 feet wide, and the distance on the street is 50.5 feet wide. The parallel sides are at right angles to your house and measure 43.75 feet and 50.75 feet. Determine the area of sod you need to buy. Let's start by drawing an image. We have a distance of 50 feet along our house that is at right angles with the two parallel sides. The two parallel sides are each 43.75 feet and 50.75 feet. And then the diagonal piece along the road is going to be 50.5 feet. We are trying to determine the amount of area or the amount of sod that we will need to fill in this area of lawn. Remember, we need to be using the area formula, which is 1/2 each of the bases times the height. In this one, the height was given because of the fact that the height says, or that one side says that it is parallel at right angles to the house. Remember, the height is simply the portion of the diagram that is at a right angle to the parallel sides. Since one side is actually is at a right angle to the parallel sides, we will be using that as our height. So 50 feet will be used as our height. And then we will be using 43.75 as A and 50.75 as B. We can now fill in our formula. Our area equals 1/2 A, which was 43.75 feet, plus B, which was 50.75 feet, and multiply that by the height, which was 50 feet. First, let's add the two bases together, 43.75 feet and 50.75 feet. When we add these two sides together, we will get a value of 94.5 feet. Now we will bring everything else down into this portion of the problem. Now we need to do 94.5 feet times 50 feet. And when we do 94.5 feet times 50 feet, we get 4,725 feet. And when we do feet times feet, we get feet squared. We still need to multiply this by 1/2, or essentially divide it by 2. This will give us an area that is equal to 2,362.5 feet squared. That is the area of sod we would need to purchase. Now try practice problem 5 on your own, remembering to pause while you work the problem out. Now let's do the problem together. We need to find the perimeter in decimeters, but two of the sides are actually in millimeters. Let's start by writing down the prefixes. Now that we have the prefixes written down, we will now need to go between two of them. We will be starting in millimeters and be moving to decimeters, which means we'll be moving 2 places towards the left. When we move the decimal spot 2 places towards the left, we can do this to both numbers because both numbers started out as millimeters and we would like them both to be decimeters. This means that we should have 15.87 decimeters and 21.20 decimeters. Now for the perimeter, it is simply adding all the sides together. So let's start by adding 18 decimeters plus 15.87 decimeters plus 16 decimeters plus 21.20 decimeters. if we add all 4 of these digits together, we will be getting 71.07 decimeters, which will be the perimeter of our trapezoid. Now let's look at our last shape, which is a parallelogram. Let's start out with a little bit of notes on the parallelogram. Just like our other shapes, the perimeter is the distance all the way around the outside edge. So, to find a perimeter, we would simply just add up all the sides. But to find the area, we would actually be doing the formula of base times height. Since we have base and height, once again, we should know the relationship. And remember that the base is at a right angle to the height. Now, if there is not a base or height, you may need to label one in your drawing or make a drawing that has one labeled. Let's start with example 6. On example 6, it says the height of the parallelogram is 15 feet. So, if the height is 15 feet, that would mean that I would need to write a height in that is at a right angle or perpendicular to the 2 parallel sides. That way, it has this right angle. And it is 15 feet. It then says that the bases that are at right angles to the height are 3.5 yards. Which means the upper base and the lower base would both be 3.5 yards. It then says to find the area in yards. To begin, I will need to change the 15 feet into yards. Since 15 feet would use the conversion of 3 feet per 1 yard, we will start by writing the 3 feet in the denominator and the 1 yard in the numerator. The feet would reduce, giving us 15 over 3 yards. When we have 15 over 3 yards, this would then divide to 5 yards. Now that everything is in yards, we can continue to find the area. Using the area formula, the area was base times height. We can use either of the 3.5s as our base, since they are both at right angles to the height. We did not need the short sides since they were not necessary to find the area of a parallelogram. Let's fill in the values. If the base is 3.5 yards and the height is 5 yards, if we simply multiply the 2 of them together, we can get our total area. Therefore, 3.5 times 5 would be 52.5, and yards times yards would give us yards squared. This means the total area is 52.5 yards squared. Now, try the practice problem in which you find the perimeter of the parallelogram. Remember, pause the video while you answer the question. Now, let's do the practice problem together. You decide you want to find the perimeter of the diamond ring your fiancé just bought you. So, you measure the sides of your parallelogram-shaped diamond to all be 2.5 millimeters. Find the perimeter of the top of your diamond. This means that your diamond must be 2.5 millimeters on all sides. Remember that to find a perimeter of a parallelogram, you simply add all the sides together. Since each side would be 2.5 millimeters, we would simply do the perimeter equals 2.5 millimeters plus 2.5 millimeters plus 2.5 millimeters plus 2.5 millimeters. Now we add all of these together and we find that the perimeter would equal 10 millimeters. That would be the perimeter or the distance around the top of your diamond.